very interesting guests. They're all from Bakersfield College in California, of course, and they were part of a controversy that erupted about the imposition of ideological criteria in campuses, which they quite rightly regarded as an imposition on their traditional academic freedom rights of autonomy to determine courses and whatnot. Our guests today are Joe Saldivar, who is professor of biology and head of department of the biology department at Bakersfield. Jimena da Silva Tavares, who is a professor of chemistry, also at Bakersfield College, and Timothy Plett, who very bravely is an assistant professor of physics in the science faculty, also at Bakersfield College. I invited them on today because they're all members of an interesting grassroots group that formed at Bakersfield College called the Renegade Institute for Liberty. And just to forestall any undue speculation on the part of people watching in, the Renegades is actually the Bakersfield College mascot, and so that is I presume where the name Renegade Institute comes from. Now. This group, the Renegade Institute, came to prominence in the past few months because they're pushing back against the imposition of DEI ideology and programs at Bakersfield College. The most visible part of this was a statement at the last trustees meeting of the Kern County Community College District by one of the trustees, John Corkins, and he said that members of the Renegade Institute are members of a small vocal minority. This is in quotes now, the 5%. He's a feedlot owner that we have to continue to cull. And so I just like to. Well, there's a lot of backstory behind that, but I'd just like to start off with a question. Do you think it's hate speech to be compared to a herd of rogue cattle that have to be culled and led to the slaughterhouse?
At least I guess I'll begin. First thing I'm going to say is 1 to 99.9999% of whatever I say today may be absolutely wrong. So I'm going to start with that one too. And I'm married, so ask my wife, she'll tell you I'm wrong a lot. Okay. I'm wrong a lot.
Okay.
I was not at the Board of Trustees meeting, but I did see I did see that aspect of the Board of Trustees meeting. And first thing I'm going to say is, although I believe it was inappropriate of what he said, but I will absolutely back and support his freedom to say exactly what he did. I have my opinion as to whether it was appropriate or inappropriate. I'm in the classroom, and I think earlier this week I probably tried a little joke, and it probably maybe crossed the line too. So I get sometimes maybe you say something that you may regret. It's up to the trustee whether or not he wants to apologize or not apologize. I think that's actually, personally, I believe that's where his constituents have the opportunity to say whether it's appropriate or inappropriate. So at least that's my view.
I'll go ahead and second Joe on the, first, here we're speaking as individuals, right? So, I mean, pretty much, and I'll tell my students this during office hours. I'll be like, hey, when I'm not talking about chemistry, this is my opinion, and I could be wrong, right? And the whole point is our ability to discuss those issues. I come from Uruguay. I was raised Catholic. And for me, one of the things that comes to mind is let he who is afraid of sin cast the first stone. Because this is essentially about our ability to freely and openly discuss ideas. So if we're all walking on eggshells because whatever we say is going to get misinterpreted, I mean, I think that's precisely that's one of the issues that I would love to talk about today. So I'm not casting any stones.
I don't have much to expand on. I think both of my colleagues hit all of the points well, but it is a good lesson in the fact that any speech that is public will be subject to scrutiny.
Yeah, as it should be.
And of course, if you're a room large enough, somebody will be offended somewhere. It could be a room of 1 or 8 billion.
Yeah.
And it's also, well, I think I'll just stop there for now.
Okay. For the attendees, I've put the link to the this video online on the chat, and I just want to second the comment that came into this. He did apologize publicly, and so good for him. You know, we give props for that. But when people have the chance, I would urge them to go have a look at this trustees meeting, because the first 20 minutes, the entire public comment period for that particular meeting of the Board of Trustees looked like an orchestrated show of people who had very unpleasant things to say about the Renegade Institute, and just to, I would say, again, I would urge the attendees to go have a look at that, because it's a revelation. And I didn't see any members from the Renegade Institute there, and so that's another thing. I don't know if any of you were invited to respond or will be invited to respond to those comments, but I just put this out there for all of us to consider and think about. But
Scott, maybe
yes.
I just want to interject very quickly. There are a couple of dozen faculty that are, I guess, if you want to call it, consider themselves part of the Renegade Institute. There's no such thing as homogeneity. That's why I'm a biology instructor, not a literature or English. So we're very, very different thinkers. My guess is there are going to be maybe a couple of things that we're going to disagree with here. And some of us are religious, some of us are atheists, some of us are libertarians, some I guess you want to call it a classical liberal and conservative, but it's just a matter of, this is just an opportunity of where faculty can openly discuss and bring and talk about the different types of thoughts and ideas.
Well, that's the beauty of the academy, right? That's what gives the academy its special value in our society. That is the ability to engage in these kinds of conversations openly across wide differences of philosophical outlook and all the things that you mentioned, Joe. So again, I would second what you said. But this trustees meeting with this rather bizarre comment from John Corkins, there was a long lead up to that. You know, that didn't just come out of the blue. I understand that there was a fair bit of contentious interactions across campus over the imposition of these standards on your campus. I just wonder if you could briefly take us through the history of the run up to this rather confrontational meeting of the trustees.
So, I think we're getting down in the weeds here with certain things. And, I also have some formal medical training from back in Uruguay. And one of the things that we were always told was like, okay, we treat causes, we don't treat symptoms. So, we've got at the root cause, again, as I see it, this is my opinion and I could be wrong. And, people in the audience ask me about it and let's have a chat about it. But as I see it, what we're running into is, just because when somebody says something and somebody else hears it and is offended and or hurt by that comment, what does that mean? Does that mean that the other person doesn't have the right to say it? And, I'm honestly so again, I'm from Uruguay. We didn't have racism. We didn't have segregation in Uruguay. And this is honestly posed as a question for my colleagues, for the audience, because I'm genuinely confused about this. So, if we define racism, right? So I'm going to go on the Martin Luther King definition of racism, right? Which is treating somebody differently because of the color of their skin, right? So if that's how we define racism, right? And that's honestly, that's the principle that many of us operate under. Like you'd be hard pressed to find somebody who's not operating under these principles. That's a guess. Okay, it's not I don't have data to show that. So if that's how we're operating, right? But then we're also, if we question a person of color or a minority, and I'm Hispanic, so I count myself in that minority, and we dare to question, or we look at a person of color in a way that they didn't like. If that is now defined as racist behavior, the problem that I run into is that I honestly don't know how to operate, and I can't reconcile the two, because, if am I supposed to then treat people of color differently or the same? Like, and as a minority, I don't want to operate in a world where the people that I interact with are too afraid to question what I say or do because they're afraid of that accusation. And the last one is in academia, right? Those of us who have PhDs, it's called defending a thesis, right? And it's called defending a thesis because if you have a good idea, you're supposed to be able to defend it, and your idea should withstand scrutiny. So I see this shift, and any question, any scrutiny is now a personal attack. And that's what I would like to see academia move away from. My 2 cents.
The unfortunate part is one of the things that I try to impart to my students, and we're a community college. We're a community college, so we don't have very much research on our campus. So unfortunately, our students, and we're we're an educational island. We're located in the southern portion of the San Joaquin Valley. We have one four-year university. As the crow flies, about 8-9 miles from Bakersfield College. The next closest college universities is probably UCLA or California State University Northridge, which is about an hour and a half to the south. To the north of us is California State University Fresno, which is about another hour 45 to the south. So our students are really kind of on an educational island.
Mhm.
So they don't have the opportunity to really interact with, or let's say, for example, science conferences. So what I try to impart to my students is, when you have an opportunity to go to a science conference, you'll have the individual presenting their data, right? Here's their research. And then I tell them it's not a TED Talk, right? 20, 30, 40 minutes later, it's not just clap and then you go on. It's now, okay, questions? Okay, can you go back to slide number 16? You mentioned this. What was your control? Why have you considered this? What's the significant? It is hammer, 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 hammer. And it's not that we are trying to embarrass the individual. We're truly trying to figure out, is this the truth? And I think the unfortunate part is when individuals have a question with regards to something concerning DEI, it's really more looking for clarification and not saying you're full of crap. It truly is, whether it be data, whether it be a claim, I'll speak for me, just looking for clarification. That's all it is. And I tell my students, I will believe the earth is flat. Provide the evidence for me. I'll believe that Sasquatch is living in your backyard. Provide the evidence for me. That's what we do, right? We're trained scientists. That's what we do.
Yeah. Just to that point, and coming back to that video of the trustees meeting, a couple of the students who were upset with the Renegade Institute came up, and it was very clear that they are very their evidence of racism coming from the Renegade Institute, or turn on small little perceptions. One student walked into a room and she didn't like the look on one person's face. I think it might have been yours, Jimenez. And this was evidence of systemic racism and hatred on your part against the students, and the language of the kind of therapeutic language of needing a safe space to be able to learn was very prevalent in motivating the comments of these individuals, and the safe space dialogue or motif, if you will, clearly was coming from faculty leaders, from your colleagues there. And are we raising a generation of ultra sensitive snowflakes? I mean, is this doing any favors for the students who are coming to Bakersfield College?
I think the unfortunate part is we're forgetting that we all actually do have a common goal. All faculty that are teaching at, I will say, for Bakersfield College, we all have a common goal, right? We want student success. We want our students to attain their goals academically, personally, professionally. We all do. Now, we may have disagreements or different thoughts as to how these students can attain that academic goal. The unfortunate part is maybe it's a lack of trust, misunderstandings, where I wish we could actually sit across from each other, break some bread. And I'm actually pretty sure when we get into a room, we can actually discuss, okay, so students aren't succeeding in a particular course or particular discipline. Let's figure it out. Let's figure out why. Is it something that's is it systemic racism? Is it something within the system? Is it their preparation? Is it their academic preparation? Is it something very different? Once again, in Southern San Joaquin Valley, we are number one in several things. We're number one in horrible air pollution. We're number one. We are number one in illiteracy. We're number one. We're number one in highest rate of antibiotic resistant gonorrhea. We're number one. So there are things we need to work upon. But as Jimena mentioned, we need, if we truly want to find answers to these problems, we need to get to the root cause instead of potentially just shutting down these discussions.
Yeah, I think Scott, you alluded to the safe spaces and the culture of safetyism. So Greg Lukianoff and Jonathan Haidt addressed that in their book, The Coddling of the American Mind. And that's a good segue. I'll use myself as an example with something. So I often wonder about two things. One is, so my first name is Jimena. And through college, I got everything from my favorite Xena warrior princess to eczema, my least favorite. And I wonder what my relationship with my faculty members would have been if I'd gone through college in this current atmosphere of microaggressions. If every time a faculty member mispronounced my name, if I'd taken that as a personal insult. And, would that have created itself a barrier to my own learning? So I think one of the issues that we run into is that, so take the words diversity, equity, inclusion, right? Some of us start talking at cross purposes, right? So on the one hand, there's the diversity that I think, again, you'd be hard pressed to find somebody who won't say, hey, having people from all walks of life is good, right? By whatever definition of that you want to apply, right? Over several categories, right? Then we start to get into problems when we start to force that. So when we try to force that, right? First question is, over which dimension? Are we doing this over race, gender, ethnicity, national origin, so on, religion, so on and so forth. So over which category? And if we try to integrate all the categories, how do we then equalize them? How do we make sure that each category is having the contributions to that? So what some of us will criticize is, I'm like, okay, I'm all for diversity. How do we implement that, say, with racial diversity without falling into racial quotas? How do we do that? Like, I mean, I honestly, let's talk about it. Like, I'm all for diversity. And then the other thing, so my research was on nicotine addiction.
Mhm.
And so we're looking at the effects of nicotine has on the brain. And basically every drug that we use has potentially a side effect, right? And that side effect is because that drug is not only hitting the intended receptor, but it's also hitting all other things. It's hitting other receptors, right? So applying that concept to something like this, I go like, okay, opportunities for everybody, including underrepresented minorities. That's great. How do we do that? How do we prop up one group without automatically propping down another group? And going down that line, like this is something, so my whole life. So when I was 15, I read in a book about Caltech. And, I was in Uruguay, 90,000 miles away, like, and I thought to myself, wouldn't it be great to go to a place like that where the best science in the world is done? And I almost didn't dare to dream that dream because it was such an impossible dream. How could I, in a third world country, ever even dream of getting there? Right. And against all odds, I got there. I mean, some days I wake up and I want to pinch myself because I go like, maybe I just dreamed the whole thing. And that's also part of the reason why I teach at the community college level, because I want my students to know it's like, hey, you have impossible dreams, you can do it too. Right. So, when I think about that, once I realized part of what's going on with the diversity, equity, and inclusion, I had to call and ask people. I was like, hey, is this why I got in? Did I get in because I checked these boxes, or did I get in on merit? And I have to fight with myself not to go, yeah, I got in because I checked the right boxes, and of course people will tell you no, but what are they going to tell you? Yes.
Yeah, and you put your finger on what's a kind of a rhetorical game that's actually being played, justifying administrators basically to come in and basically tell you how to do your job. My experience has been the same as yours, Jimena. Everyone I speak to is fine with what I call small d diversity, small d inclusion. I'm a retired professor of biology now, and so even way back in the dark ages when I was a grad student, we had a small d diversity cohort of students, and it was valuable. Having different outlooks or different perspectives on things helps you solve problems creatively. There's absolutely no dispute about that, but the big problem is what we're calling big D diversity, big I inclusion, and so forth, which is actually a political program that's being imposed on faculty, and that's the point where a lot of my colleagues anyway start to be a little bit uneasy, because among other things it seems to give administrators permission to come in and take over what were basically faculty prerogatives, and so that's just my perspective, but it leads into my segue. The Renegade Institute is controversial in Bakersfield, at Bakersfield College, and one would expect to get support for defending core academic values from your own colleagues, and so I'm just wondering what the behind the scenes support has been, what some of the, how have your colleagues responded to these attacks on your group? Have they been inspiring, or have they been dispiriting?
Well, I would say that several attacks have been made directed at the Institute. I would say that they have mostly been a result of particular incidents, and so, for example, there is a Facebook group page that we sponsored for the Renegade Institute for Liberty, and several members of the Institute can post freely on ideas or comments that they happen to see and would like to make public. And so if I'm browsing as a Facebook person as myself, I don't see who actually makes the post unless I go to editor privileges. There have been a few posts in that forum which have gone to the point where they have attracted ire from several people. And then also, I think one of the things that was a major flashpoint to begin all of this was a lecture given by one of the members of our institute with regards to, actually, I can just speak because it's a matter of record, Matt Garrett's initial lecture on questions regarding how Bakersfield College was using its funding. So I would say that it's mostly been particular incidents, and because they are particular incidents, I would say there hasn't been a whole lot of additional feedback aside from what was given publicly. But I would say that privately, I think there is an effort amongst the members of the Renegade Institute for Liberty to basically be a support system for each other and affirm that, you know, what you said may have been unpopular and you may have attracted a lot of grief, but I think you had reason to say what you did.
Yeah, the Voltairean standard. I disagree with you, but I'll defend to the death your right to say it. You know, that's as always has been kind of the ideal. Now,
let me just mention at least.
Okay, Joe. Yes.
Timothy brought up the Facebook page. Just the Facebook page. There'd be posts that individuals can place on there. There would be some things that I would agree with, other things that I would disagree with. The unfortunate part, I guess, it's kind of like most or lots of social media. It then turns extremely sour and toxic. I don't have my glasses on, so because I'm an old man, and I didn't want the glare here. And but at least by the looks of it, that's what it kind of turned into in our chat. And it's only been several minutes, and it kind of turned into that as well. I wish we could, I guess, stop the us versus them. Because it truly isn't. It truly isn't. And maybe it's the little dopamine drip. It's the biohack of what happens with social media. Once again, we all have the same goal. It's just a matter of how we get there, right? So I'm going to drive from here to UCLA. So maybe somebody takes I-5, maybe somebody takes I-99 or something. But we all eventually want to get to that same spot. And for whatever reason, it veers, unfortunately, often into what did you say and who did you, and just what I saw here in whatever it is, 20 minutes. It's the vitriol is just cranked up, and that's the disheartening part of it.
It is very disheartening, because and just to amplify on that, yes, our moderators and several members have been looking at what's coming in the chat, and basically we've shut down the public chat. So we still want questions. We still are interested to hear from you, but could you please direct your questions to the Q&A box rather than the chat box, because we do feel that we've had to shut it down. But coming back to your point, Joe, it's we should actually have a common goal, a common purpose. I remember my decision many years ago to become an academic was a very joyful decision. I know it sounds kind of touchy-feely to say that, but science was fun back then, and the most fun part about it was that we were all engaged in kind of a transcendent idea, namely, we were trying to find out interesting things about nature, and it was, I hesitate to use the word, but it was kind of a safe space from some of the ugliness that was going on around us. And in the 40 years of my academic career, I noticed very strongly that it stopped being fun anymore, and it was because of this division. You couldn't engage in spirited debate with your colleagues. We did when I was in grad school, for example, and for many years when I was an active faculty member. But that's become increasingly difficult. People just don't want to argue because it's too dangerous. Dangerous. Again, I'm using those words. But I was curious to know, the imposition of values onto, excuse me, what are traditional academic values of autonomy and so forth. The imposition is bad enough, but what kinds of, well, Matt Garrett made this point of the costs that are going into producing these diversity courses, and it's substantial. It's a couple $100,000 a year. But what kinds of interventions have you seen in the kinds of your ability to teach and to shape your own curriculum and to shape your own courses? Has it risen to that point at Bakersfield?
I would say no.
Mm-hmm.
And that's actually one of the I wanted to bring 3 points of concerns, but
Mm-hmm.
these are future concerns. I don't see them happening now. So my 3 points are these. One is, we're going down this path of, making statement, saying things like students need to see in their faculty ranks people that look like them, right? So one of the concerns that I have is like, because it seems, again, and whenever there's conflict, right, this is all about, there's a difference between what one person is saying and what somebody else is hearing, right? So just by making that statement, somebody might interpret that as, well, she doesn't want to help students. It's like, that's not what I said, right? So here's if we take that to the logical conclusion, right? So if students need to see in the faculty ranks people that look like them, and if students learn better from faculty that look like them, right? And those are ifs, right? But then can somebody please explain to me how we're not going to end up, like, if we accept those premises, then we should have segregated classrooms. Like, then I'm the Hispanic faculty member, so then, okay, give me all the Hispanic students, right? So I genuinely have concerns over, in the future, will I have to say to some student that walks into my class, hey, sorry, you're in the wrong class. This class is for Hispanics, right? And then doesn't that undermine the whole idea of diversity in the first place? So again, logically, I can't reconcile those two, right? So that's what are the stopgaps that will prevent us from going that route? Honestly, that's a question. Second, and I did a little experiment in preparation for this panel, which is I went and I asked K through 12 educators whether they had the ability in their own classrooms to hold students back that haven't learned the material needed to go to the next class. Okay, and admittedly, this is a small sample size, right? So we're talking under 10 people, but 100% of them went, honestly, no. And I'm not surprised by that, because, when we teach, we sort of live with the consequences of that almost every day. And on a side note on that, while we're also busy arguing about diversity, equity, and inclusion, we're missing the point. As to this is for my fellow, actually for everybody, because I don't have an answer to this question. How do I bring a student up that doesn't have the level of preparation needed for my class when we're talking about extremely complex matters? So as an example, how do I teach a student beginning quantum mechanics in 16 weeks when they're walking into my class when they can't do fractions, if they don't know fractions? How do I do that? Because honestly, I'm like, almost a problem that I have sometimes that I care too much. Like, it's like, nobody wants to see students fail. Like, it hurts. Like, when they drop or they fail, it's like, no, come back. We want you to succeed. But when we start confusing, right, when we start having this concept creep from equity, from equality of opportunity, right? So that would be like saying to students something like, on day one, congrats, you all have A's. Your job is to keep them, right? So when we start having a concept creep from equity as equality of opportunity into equality of outcome. Okay, that's where I draw the line. So I have concerns that in the future, in the name of equity, well, then everybody should pass, right? So everybody should get a C, because after all, we're all equal, right? So what are the, you know, how is that not where we're going? Like, is what yeah.
I'm sorry, Jeff, just a quick interjection. In the state of California, we've had recent legislation that has removed all remedial math and English courses as well. So we have students that are coming in, right, we've had our COVID stuff going on for 2.5 years. We've removed all remedial courses, and now we're going to throw them in there. And can they come up with, what the heck is Avogadro's number? What is a nanometer? The volume of a cell, the surface area of a cube. We can't do that.
Yeah, and we've seen actual examples of this. The progression from elementary school up through high school to college is supposed to be a kind of progression of competency and knowledge and skills and these kinds of things. And of course, as you point out, Jimena, it's the students who are being sent to Bakersfield College are not as well prepared in those basics as has traditionally been the case. And the depressing logic that you describe is actually playing out in many places. I just had an interview with a mathematician from Oxford, and their big effort is to decolonize mathematics, and what that boils down to practically is putting a number of courses into the mathematics curriculum that do things like talk about the history of mathematics up to the point of actually treating mathematics as a kind of a European conspiracy to do damage to colonized peoples. And one of the things that has been leading to is actually a diminution of the actual math curriculum. It's very hard for them to get into actual mathematics. There's only so many hours in the week, and there's only so many years that you can devote to a college education. And one of the things that happens is that this basically political agenda is crowding out what we at the college level are supposed to be doing, which is teaching relatively advanced subjects. And I'm just wondering, Joe and Timothy, have you seen the same kind of thing in biology and in physics there, and your students coming to you?
Go ahead, Tim.
As of yet, no.
Oh, that's encouraging.
However, we do know that there is going to be an active push from the Chancellor's office to start incorporating DEI material into curriculum at all levels in the community college system. What that will look like, we don't know yet, but that is something that we may have to wrestle with very soon. And unfortunately, I think such efforts, even if well-meaning, miss the point of the sciences and mathematics, that it is a product of human reasoning towards an objective truth, which is a goal which transcends culture.
You're here. Sorry, Joe, what did you say? You had an answer to that question, but I didn't quite catch it.
Personally, our immediate supervisor, our dean, has been extremely been a great advocate for continuing our I hate the word rigor, but maintaining standards, because our courses have to be able to transfer to our University of California system, our California State University system. If we don't maintain those standards, our courses cannot transfer on over. The state, for those of you who are not from the state of California, when you think of California, right, you think of potentially very, very progressive. So you think of the Bay Area in San Francisco, you think of Southern California. The Central Valley is very, very different. I've heard it called the kind of the Bible Belt of California. It's actually a relatively conservative area. When I first heard of things, let's say, for example, of events happening at at Princeton, Yale, Evergreen State University with Brett Weinstein. I thought, well, I don't think anything like that could ever happen at Bakersfield College. It's just very conservative. I mean, even for me, my wife and I, we moved from Orange County, and Orange County, kind of the joke is behind the orange curtain, very conservative area. And when we moved to Kern County, I think we're really progressive now. I mean, so I really didn't anticipate anything like that happening. But we've been talking specifically, really Bakersfield College and Kern Community College District. Really, once again, this is coming down from the state, and this is coming down into all of our colleges. But I will say, at least we're faculty in STEM at Bakersfield College. Nobody's come in and said, you must teach it this way, you must say it this way, you must use these examples when you present, cellular respiration or anything like that. But I guess knock on wood, never say never. I don't know.
Yeah, from the sounds of it, it's coming, especially if it's coming from mandates from the chancellor's office there. But it's
not just the chancellor's office.
Okay.
It was also in the impaneled full California Community College Academic Senate.
Oh, I see. Okay. So there's a lot of support for this amongst your colleagues then as well. And it's just a matter of implementing it now. Yeah. Okay. Just to carry on your logic, Jimena, if you accept this, then how can you not avoid segregated classrooms and spaces? And of course, one of the flashpoints at Bakersfield College was this group, Umoja. It's a statewide group apparently, and there were various accusations flying around about is this a segregated space or is it not? And I just wanted to get your perspectives on that whole issue.
Unfortunately, I don't know enough about it, so I can't comment on it.
Okay, all right.
Similarly, I'm not that familiar with the Umoja community. I do know that it has as one of its goals to continue to foster resiliency in that student population. So I think in that goal, I think it's trying to do the right thing.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Likewise, I'll speak from experience on something. So I was an international student, getting, through my, bachelor's, the PhD, all that. And I can attest as a student that it was helpful to have a space, like, the places where, every school I was in, starting at Miami-Dade College, then Florida Atlantic University in Caltech, we had a space for international students, mm-hmm. right? And that was helpful for me in having, okay, there's a sense of belonging. There's other people that are going through similar things, right? And then as I've heard it, Umoja means unity, right? So, mm-hmm. so I think at its core, that's the intent. It's like, let's create a space with people in these communities have, a place to meet and to get together and to feel welcome. Okay, so I think that's where, it's like, okay, like, great. Like I as a student have benefited from having that sort of community, right? Now, and this is my opinion, okay? I believe that once we translate that into actual classrooms, right? So we didn't have separate classrooms for international students, right? We took the classrooms together, okay? So I think that step is a step that should be taken very cautiously for two reasons. One is precisely so that we don't end up with segregated classrooms, right? And then the other ties to, there's a question from one of the audience that goes like that the concern is that students will be taught that if their professor doesn't look like them, then they can't learn as well from them. Okay, so we have, we have a survey that was conducted, and I believe I can share my screen on this. Where that one.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So and this is something that I have questioned. So we're going around asking students, right, where, okay, essentially, do you feel your white professor cares about you? So here's the actual question, right? So it says indicated they mostly or strongly matter in classes with white professor versus professors of color, right? And they're choosing strongly agree, neutral, disagree, strongly disagree. So the question that I have asked, this is a twofold question. When we do this, right? First of all, isn't it a leading question? Because we're already separating faculty members into white and of color, right? So if we're going to go this route, well, where is the baseline question? The one that just is not about race, the one, okay, students feel that my professor, and it's not white or of color, cares about them. Because in science, this is what we would do. We would run a control. So what I've asked before is, where is the control, right? And things that I've been accused of is that saying that racism doesn't exist, right? And then, I mean, honestly, I get really confused because I thought in academia we understood what a non sequitur was, right? and that could also be turned into a teaching moment. It's like, no, that doesn't follow from this, right? So another question I have is like, if you looked at the data, right, it does show that there is a difference for Black students, right? So now the next question is, well, why, right? And you know, there's a egg or chicken question. There's a direction question. Like, does that mean that white faculty are doing something to change the perception of Black students, or does that mean that they're walking into the classroom with that perception in the first place? It's probably a combination of both. Maybe, like again, not probably. Like, okay, so it's like, how do we know it's A or B or a combination of both, right? Because if we go straight into, well, look, white professors are not welcoming students of color, right? And then, okay, are we creating the very first problem that we're saying that we're solving in the first place? Like, you know, as a scientist, I don't follow what the logical steps are. Like, what this data shows to me is that we have an issue of the perception of students of colors that should be addressed, because nobody should feel unwelcome, right? So it's like, but if we cannot even discuss the problem, the nature of the problem, how can we even come up with solutions, right? That's the if just the act of asking these questions is going to label one as racist. Okay, then
I'm sorry, go on.
Yeah, then are we okay? Then we just all follow along. Like, what does, okay, here's one of the solutions that has been proposed. Practice race conscious leadership. What does that look like? Like, am I supposed to listen to a dean more if they're a certain race, or less than if they're a certain race? And then isn't that against treating people differently because of the color of their skin? Like, again, as a non-American, like, I have all these questions. Like, I can't reconcile the two, because I think nobody wants to be racist. I don't want to be racist, right? Like, but how exactly do we do this? Like, and that applies to other categories as well. I'm just focusing on that one because it's the one that we like have been focused on. Like, anyway, there.
I can assure you that many Americans are asking the same question that you are. You know, how do we reconcile these things? And you know, I recall, excuse me, that you were quite harshly attacked by various groups on campus for just making those very same arguments that you have just made. And so, you know, you wonder if the antennas are up on the other side, or whether it's the walls that have gone up. And in terms of causation, you know, again, this is my opinion, for observation from watching those videos. Those students are clearly being coached about, or at least immersed in a particular ideology of, I would say, resentment, and you know, hence the difference between you know, someone who has real challenges to overcome, difficult challenges to overcome, and people who think that an unpleasant look on somebody's face is going to somehow ruin their lives. And you know, I don't think we're doing any favors to students by essentially training them in this ideology of victimhood. You know, I mean, they have power over their own lives, and why aren't we teaching them how to do that? And yeah, so. All right, well, we're 15 minutes in right now. Before we go to the Q&A, are there any other points that any of you would like to bring up before we move on to the Q&A?
At least personally, a couple of things that I really got when I went away to college, way back in the 80s, way back then. Right. First, of course, you know, the academic training. I personally thought some amazing academic training, but really, when I was able to sit in a classroom and my zoology professor was from Cuba, my biochemistry professor was from Korea, my general biology professor was from New York. Mm-hmm. And so here's this young boy from a town of about 35,000 people in a little town called Porterville, California, where I thought for 18 years, everybody thought like us. It's Porterville, California. Of course, everybody thinks like us. So when I went off to college, and now I'm sitting next to students from Pakistan, from Iran, from England, from Australia, from Fresno, and all of a sudden it's like, well, maybe we don't. Maybe I'm wrong. So I was able to get all these great interactions from national students. So leading to today, at least in my classroom, I don't know, maybe they're just taking my class, but there seemed to be a craving from my students to be challenged a little bit in their thinking. One of the books that I have, I have a couple of books that I have my students read. One of them has to do with Jennifer Doudna and CRISPR. Mm-hmm. CRISPR is a technology that allows for the potential of a DNA editing. So, you know, one of the concepts that we talk about is that the science aspects of it. And I think for many individuals, the potential treatment of sickle cell anemia, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, colon cancer, those type of things. I think many of us would agree, yeah, let's do that. But then we get into things like philosophical questions. What about height? Individuals that are taller make more money. Symmetry, mm-hmm. Right? Let's say I have I have a lazy eye. Maybe I'd like my children to be more symmetrical. They're more successful, right? If you're more successful and tall. So then we get into those types of things. And now you're kind of pushing them a little bit where maybe they do feel a little bit uncomfortable. And that's okay. They once they understand that it's not a personal attack, but just trying to maybe kind of make them experience things that maybe they hadn't experienced before. So I will say, once again, right, sample size out of 40,000 students or so is relatively small, but there does seem to be a craving for those types of ideas, at least in the STEM courses.
Tim, your thoughts?
I would say that a lot of what we've talked about here today go to cultural issues that the current society is wrestling with. And well, I don't think we'll come to a solution about any of that. We're just four people having a chat here on a Friday afternoon.
Yes.
I think there is at least a few things that you can be considerate of if you are a professor and wrestling with these sorts of difficult challenges. And I would say it has to do a bit with, in terms of just data, know what the numbers are for your courses, and not just the stuff that you always get hit with. But if you step beyond the intro level courses in any discipline, and you go to the secondary courses that are later on down the line that have prerequisites, take a look at that data. One instance I want to bring up just for context on that is a colleague of mine and I were looking into pursuing a grant that was focused on closing equity gaps in STEM and mathematics. That was the actual language of the grant. It was sponsored by NSF. And we took a hard look at some of our institutional data, and we realized that while there may be certain gaps in the intro level courses, as soon as you get into courses with prerequisites, those gaps disappear or become so small you can't justify a grant of $1 million. So think about, and I think that goes to the point that Jimena brought up earlier. Preparation is really the key.
Yeah. And certainly in terms of being challenged, I would echo you, Joe, but it's from a previous decade further. I mean, I remember, this kind of need to try to keep up, with all the smart kids, and that challenge, of course, led by very smart professors as well, was a major spur to me to achievement, and I hope we're not depriving modern students of that. So let's go to the Q&A. While we're doing that, I'm going to browse through the chat and bring up any questions that I think aren't personal or inappropriate, and then I hope we'll have some interesting discussion. So in the Q&A, remember everyone that you can respond to this. You can type your own answers to it. You can answer live and so forth. But it's not just limited to the four of us. So please, if you feel so inclined, have a look at keep an eye on the Q&A session. So the first question is from Paul. He has an interesting idea. I would suggest that the notion of safe spaces, in quotes, is the promotion of a Munchausen syndrome by proxy by those engaging in Munchausen by proxy on an industrial scale. Do you think that what we're doing right now is promoting fragility in students and doing them harm ultimately?
I think the unfortunate part is I guess the definition of what a safe space is. Feeling uncomfortable for some individuals, for some students, for some adults, for anybody. If they don't feel comfortable, then of course in that space is not safe. Individuals that are up in the International Space Station, right? A third of their time up there is to challenge their bodies. No gravity, right? The microgravity on the body is extremely detrimental on the body, right? You have blood pressure problems, muscle atrophy, and all these types of things. So there needs to be a challenge to the body. There needs to be a challenge to our thoughts. How better to support our thesis, our opinions and thoughts than being challenged. And so that doesn't necessarily mean that if I ask for clarification, or if I ask, where did this thought come from? It's not an attack. I truly want just clarification. So the unfortunate part is just the definition, the feeling where a word or phrase is then considered, whether it be violent or an attack, instead of, let's hammer this out.
Jimena or Tim, what's your response?
I will admit to being ignorant of what Munchausen syndrome means. So somebody can enlighten me. I'll pitch in.
It's a very strange psychological condition where a parent will deliberately make her offspring sick to be able to take, to show, well, I'm not sure what the psychological state of this is, but the idea is that, by devoting so much public care, essentially, to a child that you've just made sick, it somehow elevates you to a higher moral standing. And I think that's the analogy that Paul is trying to draw there. I'm reminded also of what Amity Schleys, the historian, has said about the Great Society. There's a lot of negative legacies about the Great Society that we're still living with today. But if you look at the motivations of the people, they were motivated by optimism and all the best intentions and so forth. And I kind of wonder if that's not what's happening happening here, that administrators feel so strongly that students need this kind of thing that they're ultimately damaging them to basically show their own virtue. And so that's my little take on Paul's question. Any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'd be really cautious about attributing intent.
Mm-hmm.
So when you make a statement like that, you're saying, okay, there's the intent to hurt,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's so hard to know. I mean, how do you know what somebody's intent is behind their actions?
Mm-hmm.
So I tend to operate giving people the benefit of the doubt, like, and essentially innocent until proven guilty,
Mm-hmm.
right? So when you assume that other people are purposely trying to hurt, right, now you're assuming that they're guilty,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I think the key point here is, how do we define a safe space?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because do we define, it used to be that we defined a safe space from being physically safe. Okay, so I come from a third world country, and going to medical school, I was worried walking from my car to the classroom that I was going to be mugged, right? In fact, my car was broken into several times, right? And I was lucky to even have a car, right? So perhaps because of that, I have a different notion of what a safe space means. So I think when we say safe space, okay, I think what we mean is, okay, a place where everybody feels safe and welcome. Okay, right? But where's the line? Because as Joe pointed out, and I use this analogy in my classroom as well, I go like, okay, say I want a six-pack tomorrow, right? I mean, I want to have to work for it. I have to go and do abs and, crunches and go work out, and it's not pleasant. Like, it's like you have to, that's why I don't have a six-pack, because I like chocolate way too much and I'm not doing that work, right? But, it's the same for the mind, like, and you can see in my background, I've got Einstein's quote, right? So,
Could you read
education
that
is
for
not
us?
the learning of
Yeah.
facts,
Yeah.
but the training of the mind to think.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're training your mind, that will, I mean, if you're not tolerating discomfort, that actually means you didn't push yourself far enough. You haven't reached the limit of your ability.
Mm-hmm.
So what exactly is a safe space? What's the degree of discomfort? Because the problem that we're running into is we've run into discomfort as somebody put forth an idea that challenged my worldview. And I don't want to face that because it shakes the foundations of the thoughts that I've been led to believe. So I feel attacked, right? So that's where I see us going, right? That I think is dangerous ground for free and open discussion of ideas.
Absolutely. Tim or Joe, thoughts?
After I would also confess that prior to the question, I did not have a very good grounding in Munchausen syndrome, so I took the moment to quickly search what it is.
Oh, good.
And I think also someone in the chat brought up the point that it's about gaining attention.
Yeah.
And that's so based on that and the idea of a safe space, it's a hard question to evaluate due to the fact that it's predicated not on a system that is already in place. Because if it was a matter of a Munchausen syndrome, I would say that it would be based on cultural standards that were previously accepted by the culture at large, let's say a couple of decades ago. Whereas I think what we're seeing here is more of a redefining of cultural norms. And that is, I wouldn't classify that necessarily under the term of Munchausen. I would say that they're trying to define it in such a way so that it is actually there. So that would be how I would consider that. I wouldn't call it Munchausen. I would call it something different.
Mm-hmm.
It is, I would call what we're seeing here a cultural crisis where we are struggling over the definitions of particular things.
I love the way that you present it.
Mm-hmm.
Every once in a while, those of us who are in academia speak to others not in academia. This last Thanksgiving, we try to keep away from that stuff during Thanksgiving. But I was speaking to my brother and sister and my sister-in-law, brother-in-law. And so I said, you're right, define diversity. Very different academia versus non-academia. Inclusion, very different in academia versus non-academia. Equity, accessibility, those types of things. I think unfortunately, sometimes as academics, right, because we have letters after our name, of course that means we're smart. Personally, my name is not Joe, it's Jose Raul Saldivar. Individuals who are of Latin descent hate Latinx. Speaking for myself,
yes,
hate Latinx. It was imposed by academics because we know better. Sometimes we've just got to get off our high horses and recognize just because we have letters after our names, sometimes we're wrong. We're wrong, and that's okay. The beauty of science is that previously we thought bloodletting was the best way to help cure certain types of illnesses and diseases, but then we recognize maybe bloodletting isn't the greatest thing in the world, and that's okay. It's okay to make mistakes, recognize them, and say, okay, there we go.
Yeah. I mean, building on the Munchausen by proxy analogy, I think there's I agree with you, Tim. There have been cultural forces operating that are actually quite large and have been going on, and part of the Munchausen by proxy syndrome is to try to elevate parents to their role as caregivers, and the idea is to show everyone what a good parent you are. And of course, we've had this phenomenon that's been going on for a long time. Jonathan Haidt also and Lukianov have pointed this out. And an increased involvement of parents with the education of their adult children still in college, and the phenomenon of helicopter parents ties into this. And I'm prepared to give administrators a little bit of a pass because they are the ones who have to be talking to parents. And if the parents are giving them this pressure, oh, my child is not safe there, then that's kind of a big cultural shift, I think, that certainly didn't exist when I was a kid. I mean, my parents couldn't wait to get me out of the house. I know that we had safe spaces there, but the safe spaces were spontaneously created amongst us, the students. It was us against the professor, and we were rising to the challenges and so forth. And I never would have expected my parents to come in and intervene with me. And so maybe that's the resolution of this Munchausen by proxy system. All right, so let's move on through the Q&A. Tom Sue, he asks if you guys could suggest ways that academia in the U.S., which he identifies as a core scope for me, can reestablish healthy dissent. How do we do it?
I have some 4 cents.
Excellent.
So, one, I found myself asking myself, kind of like, how do we get here and how do we get out? Which is essentially what that question comes to, I think. And for me, I think it's a return to communication, tolerance, and grace, right? So communication in terms of, okay, somebody said something that offended you or you didn't like, or, well, the first step would be to talk to them directly. It's like, hey, I mean, and this is just my 2 cents. I'm not trying to tell everybody what to do. It's like, but if we all did this, how much grief could we save, right? So first step should be directly with that person. Hey, is that what you meant to say, right? Which borders on, goes onto the tolerance. Like if we went and say, hey, I heard this, is that what you meant to say? And so give the other person the grace and the tolerance to go, gosh, no, that wasn't what I meant to say. I'm sorry that that's what you heard or that you were offended. This is what I meant to say, right? So then tolerance for, hey, and how boring would the world be if we all agreed on everything? So tolerance just say, well, let's agree to disagree and let's go have some drinks. And then just grace to forgive those who have trespassed against us, or those who we perceive as having trespassed against us, right? So that things don't turn into an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, right? So that's, and finally, the Gandhi quote, be the change that you want to see in the world. So that's how I approach actually all of my interactions now, assuming that the person I'm talking to, that we share common goals, that we're all here for the benefit of our students, and we all have necessary and vital roles to play, and that we get to agree to disagree on the things that we don't agree on.
Yeah, excellent words to live by, and of course the concern is that can we expect grace from people who disagree with us? And I know at one point that was possible. It still is in many respects, but it just takes a few people who don't share that grace to drive a culture downhill very, very fast. And so, and again, this comes back to the comment, Tim's comment. These are very big cultural changes. What can we do to actually try to bring grace back into our academic lives?
I know horses out of the barn, and so I'm gonna sound like
Yeah.
old fart Joe. So here's old fart Joe.
Right.
This thing here,
Yeah.
this thing here,
Mm-hmm.
and this thing here. Unfortunately, text can be taken out of context.
Yeah.
Right? Was it satire? Was it, were you trying to be funny, or were you or what those words were they literal as to what you meant?
Yeah.
That's why, hey, old man Joe, I prefer a phone call.
Yeah.
And that way you can hear it, voice inflection, if not phone call, voice face to face.
Yeah.
I can almost guarantee things that are much easier said, from who knows how far away on this, you probably wouldn't say if you're sitting across a table with maybe a beverage or some bread or some wine across from each other.
Yeah.
So maybe that's the way to do it. I mean, the generation now, my children, they're now raised on this generation. So maybe we cold farts aren't good at it, and they'll be better at it. I certainly hope so. I'm an optimist that it will get better, but boy, it's at least for me personally, I try to use face-to-face or voice as much as possible.
Yeah. I certainly find interactions with people face-to-face far more cordial and collegial than over a smartphone or even by email. Tim, do you have any thoughts on that?
I think both of my colleagues hit one of the important things that I think is within the realm of what is possible. And that is ensure that we interact as much as we can with our colleagues one-on-one and in person whenever possible, because I think that is one of the only ways you can break down your preconceptions of a person based on whatever their known ideology is. As far as what we can do on a institutional level, there are not as many options available, I would say, especially if like in the situation that we're here in California with the top-down approach to imposing certain requirements. I'm not quite sure how much we're able to resist that, but I think as far as we are experts in our discipline, we can resist in that degree. But the problem is that whatever we do, there is going to be that fact that we are teaching science, and that's two words, science and teaching. And so on an institutional level, there will be pressure on the teaching side of things. And so as regards that, I think the potential of looking at additional methods to resist that sort of creep of DEI into the classroom, I'm not entirely certain what we would be looking for, but I think alternative ways of creating a cultural sensitivity, but where the focus is toward resilience rather than a focus towards what some people describe as coddling, might be an answer to that question.
Yeah, or brittleness is the opposite of resilience, as you know. Okay. All right. So Bruce Gilley asked a question is actually directed to you, Jimena. Why does Dr. De Silva Tavares say she supports diversity? Doesn't that pre-commit her to a reductive and often demeaning view of the individuals she interacts with? I personally disagree with that, given what you have just said. Why not support human beings? Instead, in quotes, leave it to each context, whether any reductive categories are salient, and given the heavy ideological loading of diversity ideology, doesn't that simply open the way to the problems the group has encountered? And this is, I think, draws from the previous question, what is it that we do? And Jimena, you made a very persuasive case that we just have to be graceful people and talk to people and so forth. And so that's just my 2 cents, but I'll let you respond to this.
So, Bruce, I think you're hitting the nail on the head with the question in terms of, because it all hinges on how do we define diversity? Yeah. Right. So that's what it all hinges on. So I'm using diversity in the broadest sense of the word, which applied in a sociological context would be people from all walks of life. Right. So that means all human beings. Right. But I'll even, and since I've got 2 biologists here, right. So biologically speaking, diversity is so important that we actually have a mechanism called meiosis to ensure genetic diversity, right? Yes. So I'm using diversity in that sense as is, hey, we celebrate our differences because in those differences, we can find often solutions to problems that we wouldn't have thought if we were operating under a completely homogeneous system. So I'm using diversity as synonym for heterogeneity there.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, it's the difference between what we've been calling small d diversity, which everyone is in favor of. I don't know of anyone who's not, versus big D diversity, which is this political program of teaching certain things certain ways. Okay, so Aaron Miller asked a question. The former chancellor of the California Community Colleges argued that algebra was racist. I don't know where that quote comes from, but she goes on to say, using DEI to block requirements like algebra has potentially catastrophic impact on STEM enrollment and transfers. If we use the former chancellor's perspective, this would drastically reduce diversity within STEM. And this then will again feed the narrative that STEM is racist. And can you talk about your concerns related to this, or as you see it? I hope the question makes sense. And I think you were addressing this a little bit, Jimena, with your argument about what's the logical outcome of the path that we're on. So I wonder if you could, or Joe or Tim could come in and comment on this.
Yeah, go ahead, Joe.
Go ahead.
Oh, okay.
For me, it'll be really quick.
Okay.
I'd love for elaboration. Where you have this claim. I'd love to hear as to why you have this thought or opinion or thesis. I'd actually love to hear more. Provide evidence, proof as to why this is, and tell you what, you can present that. I'm with it. Then let's fix it. Then I think some of the unfortunate parts are where we would hear claims of certain aspects of our higher education, or even, I guess, in society, that there are some systemic racism. Fantastic. Let's identify it. Let's fix it, instead of just kind of the boogeyman behind whether it be outcomes or things like that. Let's find it, remedy it, and boom. Let's do that, instead of just. Unfortunately, I think sometimes, once again, I could be absolutely wrong, how much of it is just words and how much of it is actually we have evidence for.
Yeah, I think Joe makes an excellent point. What is the criteria that you're using to call this thing racist? And if it's a matter of that students of a particular ethnicity are getting a substandard education because they are that particular ethnicity, that is patently racist. Sure. But if it's a matter of different groups having different outcomes, even though they are being provided with the same kind of instruction, well, that suggests that there's something else going. Me personally, I would not see that as racist, but someone else might identify that as there is a systemically racist problem based on the new criteria that is being forwarded by people like Ta-Nehisi Coates and Ibram X. Kendi. And so again, it's this difficult land of definitions that we're sort of mucking around in. And as far as seeing where the danger of this going somewhere is, I think what Joe alluded to with regards to the removal of the remedial courses from the community colleges, that I think is a direct fruit of this sort of thing. And I think that will hamstring a lot of people's efforts to actually succeed in STEM. And I want to say that there were letters sent to the academic senate from many of the science and math faculty directly arguing against this move. But the move happened anyway. So the math faculty have been heroes, in my opinion, to try to address what they can, because they've had this tool taken away from them to help students succeed. And so I think they've tried to do the best they can with what the situation is. But I think that to deny educators tools to help some students succeed is counterproductive to the role and job of an educator.
Yeah.
Piggybacking off of Tim's arguments, I think one of the shifts that I'm seeing, and again, as Joe said, I could be wrong, this is my opinion, is a shift from seeing prerequisites as sort of insurance for the student. It's like, okay, we're making sure you know the things you need to know to be successful in this class, to a barrier. This is something that is keeping you from enrolling in this class. We need to get rid of this barrier. Right. So that sort of, and I'm also into horses. So with horses, we got the blinkers with when they're pulling carts, so they don't see the cars coming. So to me, that's just putting blinkers on, because you're seeing it as a barrier, but then you're not. And then when people like the math faculty and the STEM faculty are going around saying, hey, like, this is a bad idea. And then at the highest level, I'm talking about the state level, it's just, we're not being heard. Like, this is the concern is, it goes like this. So students that are not prepared to be in our classrooms are being put in our classroom. If there is a systemic inequity, that is where I will put my finger on it. It's like many of them are being set up for failure with this in STEM, in my opinion. Okay. And once we do that, then we go look at the equity gaps, right? So if the gaps are broader for a certain demographic, right? And this is something that scientifically would be a very poorly designed study, right? Instead of looking at all the possible causes, we're going to go like, okay, it could be A, B, C, D, E, or F. We're going to look at all of those. No, we're going to say that it's A, to the exclusion of all the others, right? So it must be that there's something wrong with STEM. It must be that STEM is racist, right? And my concern is that that's what's going to get used as a morality cudgel to beat STEM faculty into compliance with, hey, if you don't do this, we're going to label you as racist, right? Which again, who wants that label? Those are career-ending labels.
Yeah.
And it's also happening with our humanities faculty as well, with the no remedial English courses, reading and writing courses.
Yeah. We're approaching the end of our time, but I did want to give some attention to several comments in the Q&A that seem to be coming from people who are critical of the Renegade Institute. So, for example, Oliver Rosales asks whether we believe, the panelists believe that Bakersfield College has the right to conduct internal investigations regarding faculty conduct. Yana Bond asks asks, did the moderator, I think she means me, watch the entire comment section from the video of the board meeting? And some criticisms there. The answer is yes, I did. Ray Sanchez asks, have colleges and universities made race and racism the central focus over, I guess, / against teaching and learning? We've addressed some of those, but these all seem to be tied into this controversy between the Umoja and the criticism of it by the Renegade Institute. And this leads to Matthew Garrett's question, which I hope we can address, since he was actually at the center of this controversy, and he actually is facing disciplinary charges right now for his comments. And Matthew asks, do you have any thoughts on the Board of Governors' recent changes to Title V to include devotion to DEI and anti-racism as a point of evaluation for employment? How will that play out in the sciences? Or DEI devotion and scientific processes mutually exclusive? Is this a new telos, or can we do both science and the DEI anti-racism agenda? And you guys know Matthew Garrett well. I wonder if you could answer his question.
Or many questions there, my goodness.
I know, like the
Okay.
telos.
Yeah, actually, I think I made an earlier comment with regards to the last question in his list with regards to telos and DEI anti-racism agenda. And this is just me speaking purely on my own opinion with regards to what I believe science to be. And I would say that science and mathematics that directly study the behavior and processes that we observe in nature attend to an application of human reasoning to an objective reality. And that is something that is transcendent. It is not something that is the subject of lenses per se. It is the subject of understanding how the world actually operates and actually behaves and can actually be manipulated. And so I don't think that a DEI anti-racism lens applies to it just insofar as the subject is devised. So I would say that insofar as the actual study of the material and nature itself is concerned, I don't think that you can do it with a quote unquote DEI lens. It is either science or it is not science.
This is year 2026 for me at Bakersfield College. I started when I was 3. Just it's the stress that it's been imposed on me. So I look a little bit older. I'm really curious. So 26 years in, what are you going to do? Right. I mean, I'm almost on my way out anyway. I'd be curious for the less veteran faculty, if there was something imposed that had to do with some kind of a statement with regards to DEI, whether it was self-interest versus self-preservation. Do I believe in it? Do I don't? What are the consequences or ramifications if I don't necessarily provide something that would be approved by my evaluation committee, dean, or administration? I think we've all heard from, including myself, there were some courses in where maybe I had to write a paper and it was understood I had to write it in a particular fashion. If not, I may not necessarily receive the grade I wanted. I was a pre-med, wanted to go to med school, so of course I'm going to write it the way I think my instructor may want it. So I wonder if it's now just an extension, a potential extension of that for faculty, for non-tenured or a less veteran faculty.
One concern that I have is, so one of the Title V regulations, and I'm actually not sure, I couldn't find it, whether this has already gone into effect or whether it's going into effect. So one of the changes is that we're now going to introduce DEI into our tenure evaluations. And, I brought props, so okay, here's my mate. Okay, and I walk around the campus and I joke around, this is my whiskey and this is my weed, and that's what gets me through the day. But okay, in reality, this drink is from Uruguay and Argentina and parts of Brazil, and it's traditional. Like my husband and I both do it. We walk around. Sometimes we get some funny looks because, you know, it does look like drugs, but it's not. It's just tea, right? And here's the thing. So exactly how do you define culturally competent? Because can I go around and say, well, how many of you knew what this was? And if you didn't know that this was a mate, then hey, by my definition, I could label you as culturally incompetent. Because I mean, it really is a really big part of my culture. So again, when we introduce those things, right, which the intent of something like this, it's okay, let's make sure that faculty are welcoming. Okay, but you know, I question the application of something like that. What are the safeguards against that being used as a weapon to beat faculty into ideological conformity, right? And then, you know, we spent about, I don't know, an hour and a half now talking about, okay, how do we stop this, against that, right? And that's part of the problem that we run into because we're explaining why this is bad. Okay, great. But I have one more thing. What are the things that we should focus instead, right? So to me, it's we need to keep certain matters within faculty purview so that faculty can retain the ability to maintain standards in their own classroom, because that way we can ensure that degrees can maintain their value, right? And then the next one is we want to make sure that we maintain free and open communication of ideas in academia so that education does not become indoctrination, right? Because ultimately, the only answer I can come up with is the only way to fight bad ideas is with better ideas. And for that, we need to be able to debate and talk to each other freely. So that's the it's not just against these things, no, for these other things. And I think that's part of how we get out.
Yeah. Well
and
said.
Right? And as biologists, that's natural selection, right? We got the bell-shaped curve. Right? We've got different adaptations, and let's take a look at which adaptations are better, and those survive onto the next generation. But we need that bell-shaped curve. We need that the variety of thoughts and ideas.
Yeah.
So one of the challenges is that the intrinsic worth or value of an idea also has to be forwarded by good rhetoric and proper presentation. And that is where we can run into challenges. Yeah.
Okay, I wish we could explore these issues further, but we are at the end of our time. Let me just put in a couple of plugs for future events here for the audience. Next week, we will have a special episode of Restoring the Sciences. Our guest will be Nathan Kopnes, who has written a very interesting article recently entitled 4 Reasons Why Heterodox Academy Failed. Interesting. It's causing a bit of a stir. And then on the 4th of April, we'll have a special, also a special episode of Restoring the Sciences. It'll be a live conversation with Heather McDonald and Pat Kambupati, who are going to be participants in the MIT Free Speech Alliance sponsored great debate over diversity and inclusion, with the question being resolved that academic DEI programs should be abolished. And so do keep an eye out for that. And it just remains for me to thank the 3 of you for coming on for a very stimulating discussion. Joe, thank you very much. Jimena and Tim, I really enjoyed it, and I hope you did too. And with that, I will say goodbye to all. Great talking to you.